Hello everyone, today I'll be narrating 3 new creepyposts that I found off of the Let's Not Meet subreddit. Liking this video and subscribing to my channel helps me a lot. After you've heard these stories, let me know what you think of them in the comments below. But without further ado, let's dive straight into their experiences.
These are their stories.
I've worked a few odd jobs in my life. My first job was a summer job at 16 during summer break at a dairy farm. I absolutely hated it there and made it harder for me to find the motivation to even try finding work again when the time came. I don't really remember how I was first referred to the job, but the following summer I ended up working as an office assistant for a self-employed photographer. My parents knew her because she used to be a member of their church, and my sister attended her 4-H program when she had it. By that time, her health had begun to take a hit as she claimed it was a mixture of things from chronic Lyme to fibromyalgia. I had also been warned by my parents that she was a little off. She was very religious and claimed to have had real encounters with demons, even participated in a few exorcisms. I'm an atheist and a skeptic, so I never took her story seriously. Aside from the weird things she would tell me, she was mostly harmless and working for her was not hard. The job basically required me to do a lot of data entry, as well as help prep her photos with some minor touching up and the addition of her company watermark before uploading them to a site where her customers could browse them and then pick which ones they wanted to order. She primarily photographed horse events, dressage, stadium, and cross-country jumping, etc. And for the first several months, my job stayed in her living room, which is basically my office space at the time. Eventually, I was talked into tagging along at shows where she trained me as a photographer, and soon I was shooting at the events along with her. It was boring work, I won't lie. I'm not a horse person, but things didn't get weird until a year later when I learned the hard way it was not her that I needed to worry about. She had 2 sons, one who was out of state, the other one was in the Navy. The latter of the two, a guy called Nate, I had only heard small things about. When he finally returned home and I met him for the first time while working in her living room, he seemed like a nice guy, a little odd but not concerning. He was obsessed with movies, and being a bit of a movie buff myself, whenever he would venture to the living room to strike up a conversation, it would always be about whatever movies we were into or were excited to see. I should point out here that I was 18 by this point and he was in his mid-30s. At some point he got it in his head that I was interested in him, though he never said anything directly to me. I had to find out about it from my parents. My mom worked as the secretary at her church and Nate knew it. I can only guess my boss had told him. One afternoon, Nate showed up at my mom's desk and started gushing about me. He talked about how much fun I was, how he loved talking to me, how he was planning to take me to the movies and take me to this church, and all these other plans he had for me. My mom was beyond uncomfortable, as was the pastor who happened to overhear it, and when I got home that night, she told me what had happened and suggested I make sure not to lead him on. I was completely baffled because I hadn't done anything. We never even discussed the possibility of doing anything together. I made an effort to acknowledge him less when he was around and keep the conversation short while stressing I had work to do. Eventually, he got his own place and moved out of his parents' house, so I figured the problem had solved itself. A couple years later, I had moved out, my boss's company had closed, and I was working someplace new. I was friends with both my boss and Nate on Facebook, and around that time I was finally coming out as an atheist, something I couldn't do when I was still living at home. One night, my old boss messaged me, asking about a ring I had on my finger. It was a black ring with a white solid star in the middle of a black circle. Already knowing where she was going with this, I told her it was just a ring. She started accusing me of wearing a pentagram because she didn't know what a pinnacle was, and that I was promoting Satan. I tried several times to explain to her that not only was it not that symbol, but that also paganism has nothing to do with Satan anyways, but she refused to listen, so I just ignored her. It was typical behavior of her and not worth the argument. The next morning, I had a message from Nate telling me I needed to come to his church with him. I told him no, and the messages I received back gradually grew angrier and angrier. He went from asking to demanding I go with him. He told me I was lost and that I would not find the answers I needed by living the life I was. Eventually, he outright said he thought the fact that I was wearing a pentagram was disgusting and that I was opening myself up for possession. Knowing there would be even less of a point in arguing with him than there was with his mother, I went ahead and blocked both him and her, deciding I was done with the both of them. Then, he started showing up at my workplace. He would always search through the store until he found me, and then once he did, he would corner me and not stop talking to me no matter how many times I tried to dodge him or tell him I needed to get back to work. Eventually, the managers caught on and started intercepting him whenever he showed up. I wasn't making enough to pay the rent with that job, so I had to take up a second one. Within a week of working my second job, which was in a different town, he showed up there too. This time I told the managers outright who he was, and after that, every time he showed up, I was allowed to hide in the back room behind a locked door while they sped his order along and got him out. One of those many encounters, while I was hiding in the back, one of the managers was back there with me, inputting employee time punches into the computer when the both of us heard Nate shout in our directing, "I know you remember me." That was the last straw for them, and they told him his business was no longer welcome welcome there. He started showing up at my other job as well for a while, which was a relief. Fast forward to a few years later, I was getting used to not having to look over my shoulder every shift or checking the parking lot for his truck. Then one day he reappeared. He was browsing a section I was walking past when he spotted me and got this deer in the headlights look. I made a beeline to the break room because just seeing him made me scared. After that, he started showing up regularly. I would always find ways to dodge and avoid him, but he would still eventually spot me and know I was still there. I was debating whether or not to tell the managers because at this point it had been a while since he had done anything, and saying something just because I was nervous didn't feel right. Call me a coward or an idiot, but that was my thought process. What happened next made me regret not speaking up. It was bound to happen eventually, but one night he managed to catch me while I was at the customer service desk. He approached me and said hi, and I immediately started to look for someone to signal over so I could make a break for it. But before I could say a word, he said something that made me feel sick. "How's your little girl doing? She's 3 now, right?" I looked at him horrified. I had him completely blocked from all of my social media, I had his number blocked, I was living at a new address, and I had not seen or spoken to his mother since she confronted me about my ring. I had not told either of them I was a parent now or that I was married, and I was not friends with anyone who knew them, but he knew. "How's your husband doing too?" he asked when I didn't answer. "He's good, he's a good man," I said, trying to reinforce the idea that I was not available to him and that I had no desire to have anything to do with him. "Where does he work?" At this point, I felt like I was going to pass out. Thankfully, another employee approached just to gather some reshelves, and I got out of there. As I was leaving, he called out behind me, "I'll see you again, we'll talk. We'll go out and do something together, we will." I reported him to the managers, telling them everything about the encounter, including all the information he had on me and my family that he should not have had. They were able to pull up his face on CCTV. I haven't seen him since the incident with my managers. I think he may have gotten scared off. Turned out one of my coworkers used to work with him too at a different job, and she also made a complaint about him to the managers. I don't know what they did with that information afterwards, but I know he hasn't shown up since. It sounds like they plan to call the cops if he sets foot in the store again. With 2 employee complaints of stalker-like behavior, they refuse to ignore that. When I was about 7 years old, my father bought a few hundred acres in southern Mississippi about 1.5 hours west of Mobile, Alabama. He built a small cabin on top of a hill that was in the middle of a large field surrounded by woods. This house was about 5 miles from a paved road. To get to our land, it took nearly 10 minutes of driving down dirt roads from the main highway, which was south of the house. About a quarter mile north from the house, he built a small lake, more like a pond. It was about as long as a football field but wider. To get to the lake from the house, you could take Route A, which was a hard-packed dirt road that was lined with dogwood trees. It was beautiful in the spring. Route B was about 100 yards east of Dogwood Lane, and we named it Vampire Trail because it was always so gloomy. The trees blocked out the sun on the brightest days, and it had a slight decline as you walked toward the lake. I say walked because this trail was not for vehicles. Thick woods filled the area outside and in between both trails. One morning during the fall, my parents and my little sister had gone to get ice cream and do some shopping. This trip would take them at least an hour or 2. I was 10 years old, so I decided to go fishing while listening to Bama play Ole Miss. The game was the usual Bama win, so I thought I could ease the boredom of a blowout by fishing in the well-stocked lake, so I carried my pole, small radio, and my small ice chest. I had an Airedale Terrier named Bull that never left my side, and it was on this day I realized how awesome he really was. Onto the lake we went. Picture a large oval, roughly the size of a football field, but larger with an L-shaped pier in the southeast corner. Vampire Lane opened up to a more severe decline to the shore and then the small pier. Across the lake on the west side there was a narrow tree line that separated the shore from Dogwood Lane. The north side of the lake was the dam, and the south end in thick and swampy woods. Fortunately for me, I realized later. About 5 minutes after I threw out my line and 2 Bama touchdowns later, I got that feeling. It's a feeling I have come to recognize well, and it may have saved my life this day. The feeling of being watched by something dangerous. Bull must have felt it too, because a few seconds later I could hear him growling low and staring across the lake to the west, to the tree line that separated Dogwood Lane from the lake. I turned my head in that direction and almost immediately my eyes lit on what I thought to be half of a silhouette of a large man behind a tree. It was too far to make out details, but close enough to be sure of what I was seeing. Almost 5 minutes went by, and right before I scolded myself for an overactive imagination, the half silhouette moved behind a tree slowly. Bull stood and growled louder, and I told him quietly to stop, and I turned my head north towards the dam while keeping my eyes and attention rooted to that tree. Over the next 10 minutes, which felt like hours, I watched while this figure moved slowly from tree to tree, always north and always facing me. The saying "scared stiff" was something I found to be true. For some reason I thought it was important that whoever or whatever it was did not know I was aware. I finally realized that the figure's path was bringing it closer to the dam, which would make its path to be shorter and easier. My paralysis broke and I casually put down the fishing pole and started walking towards Vampire Lane. As an adult, I was in the army for 11 years as an MP, but not turning to look over my shoulder during that walk was the hardest thing I have ever done. In my mind's eye, whatever it was screaming across the dam towards me. When I hit the tree line, I broke into a run. As I was running, Bull dashed ahead of me and my anger turned into admiration as he stopped some 20 yards ahead and faced north until I passed him. He continued this action the entire run home. My dog was watching my back, just epic. Although I can grasp the awesomeness of this now, at the time I was so scared that I was literally sick. Even at such a young age, I knew that a large man watching and trying to creep up on a 10-year-old boy was up to no good. When I reached the cabin, I immediately locked the door and got one of my dad's shotguns as well as his .38 revolver. I sat at the large front window, my eyes glued to both trail openings in the woods between them. My family returned shortly after, and for some reason I did not mention what happened. I never felt safe there again. When me and my friends or my little sister wanted to go anywhere other than the area around the cabin, I made sure my parents were with us. What scares me the most though is the fact that our closest neighbors were about 2 miles northwest of us, with thick woods in between as the crow flies. Who or what was watching me from the woods that day, guess I may never know. I sometimes wish I could go back then, as a grown man with military training as I am now. Bull lived a full life and was put to sleep peacefully as a very old but great dog. The best dog I have ever known. This happened a few years ago, and since then it has made me look at people very differently. I used to work in a strip mall out in a fairly rural area. Most people are recognizable even if you don't know them personally. People from out of the area frequently stop on their way through to other towns, so it's not like there are never out-of-towners, just that they might be easy to spot. Like in many places, we have a few homeless folks that hang around the shopping center, and they occasionally ask people for change or food. It could be a nuisance, but the folks that worked at the shops kind of kept an eye on them to help them out or to keep track of how they are doing. There's this one guy, let's call him Shane, that over the course of years has slowly gotten in worse and worse shape. He would be filthy and was clearly not doing well mentally, and was usually intoxicated. He always had several layers of clothing, and the pants that he wore on the outside of his other pants always sagged, making it hard for him to walk. He'd go missing for days and then show up again. We'd wonder what happened to Shane and ask around a bit, and a few days later he'd appear again. He was always so dirty. I always wished there was a way we could get him some help, but I didn't really know what to do. One day I was out in a major city that is about 80 or so miles away from where I work. I happened to see a well-dressed, very well-groomed gentleman that looked exactly like Shane, but at that moment I figured my eyes were deceiving me. This guy has an expensive looking shoulder bag, a new iPhone, and an Apple Watch. We were both in line at a popular food truck, and it was usually a long wait to order and get your food. Most people just mind their business and scroll on their phones while waiting. This guy, on the other hand, is staring daggers at me. I keep avoiding looking that way, but I keep glancing to see if he's still there, and at the time I want to look at him because I'm so curious about how much he looks like Shane. I glance his way and I have to stumble back because he's practically right up against me. He has such intense eyes. He sort of whispers to me, but really intensely, and tells me he knows where I'm from and what shop I work at. He gets closer and I can tell he smells good, and I can even smell his minty breath. I ask how he knows and he just smiles. I ask again and he smiles brighter, exposing a perfectly clean set of teeth, minus one tooth. I'm almost positive Shane is missing that tooth. I edge away, feeling more than a little uncomfortable. His order gets called up, but they say his name is James. The next few days I don't see Shane anywhere around the shopping center, and I ask around and no one had seen him for a few days. Someone says they hope he's okay, another person shrugs and says they wish they could do something to help him. The next day he is here, filthy as ever, grimy teeth, dirty fingernails, and wearing all his layers. He sits on the curb outside my shop and asks people for change. I decide to venture out and confront him. I'm 100% sure it's him, but I don't understand how he could get so filthy and smelly in such a short time. I ask him if he was in the city, and he looks at me through bloodshot eyes and mumbles that he'll kill me if I tell anyone. This takes me aback and I look at him puzzled. He slurs again that he will kill me if I tell anyone that he's not actually homeless. He starts to get worked up, but I ended up calling the police because I didn't know at that point what he was capable of. He wandered off and I haven't seen him since. Alright, so that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments below. But as always,
Have a nice day.